Was it Tom?
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
I am. This next question has to do with environmental issues, and I know Mrs. Dykema has been vocal about environmental issues. Dan, I'm going to assume that you're not anti-environment, despite any feelings about Al Gore. But part of being environmentally responsible is recycling. Mm-hmm. And part of recycling is a dirty little word called trash. And I think, I know folks here in Hopkinton have been involved in the issue of a transfer station, Harvey recycling, and I think Casella has become a big issue in Holliston. Actually, this has become an unbelievably lucrative business and a great producer of tax revenue. The only problem is siting. Yeah. Nobody wants it in their backyard. Sure. What do you say to these folks?
Well, it's not. It's certainly not puzzling why someone might say I don't want a big trash dump in my backyard. I am of course not anti-environment, and that is the most immediate environmental issue, where you live, the air you breathe, and if it smells like garbage. You're right, it has to go somewhere, and that's an area where the state can not only impose the necessary regulations to make sure that, in Holliston you drive around, or at least until recently you drive around, there's signs in that area saying it's about the water, and it's people concerned about runoff and everything else, and the state needs to be able to assure people that those facilities are regulated, that there's enough oversight, that they're clean and that they're safe. And then communities ought to be given incentives and rewards for siting those facilities, because frankly, you're right, nobody wants them, and so it's a cost-benefit type of analysis.
Okay, Carolyn, same question.
I have intimate familiarity with this issue, having worked on the former Casella site in Holliston. And I agree with Dan's comments. I think anything like that, I think we're seeing the same issues with utility infrastructure. Very difficult to site, especially as areas get more dense. It gets more and more difficult to site these facilities. I think the communities have to work through these issues in the short term. I think we need to be looking long term and looking down the road, looking at the potential in waste to energy. Can we actually turn trash into a resource as opposed to having it be as a waste product? I think that's the innovation, that's the creativity. Quite frankly, looking at the economic development potential, that's the very type of thinking that we have always excelled at here in Massachusetts. The innovation economy, the high-tech economy, the creative out-of-the-box thinking. I see these types of challenges, if you look at the flip side of that coin, are very much opportunities for us if we can only identify them and move them forward. And I think the state level and representatives who have an interest in these issues can be leaders in this, in these areas and moving us ahead.
All right, folks, they're telling me we've got about 8 minutes left to our show. There's going to be just a couple of questions, brief answers, and then we're going to wrap it up. All right, Tom, you're up, I think.
All right, let's go. I'm a resident of Hopkinton. You both live in Holliston. You seem like nice people. However, I am parochial, small-minded, and petty, so I have my doubts. He knows me. I have my doubts that you'll have my best interests at heart when you represent me on Beacon Hill. I also speak for the people of Medway, Southborough, and Westborough when I ask this. How can I trust you guys who live in Holliston? Carol.
First, I will say, having gotten to know Hopkinton in the last couple of, well, last 6 months actually, I am quite certain that the town of Hopkinton will be sure it is never forgotten at the State House. I also, one of the important priorities for me, and one of the reasons why I decided to run for representative to begin with, is because I feel that this job needs to be a full-time job. I feel that there are enough needs in all of the communities, and our district is diverse enough and encompasses 5 towns, which is a significant number of towns. I really believe that to do the job that needs to be done and to make the progress that we really need to see at the state level, we need to have this job be a full-time job, and that's what I'll make it.
Follow up. Dan, you're a lawyer, Paul's a lawyer. He was not full-time. Will you be full-time?
No, I will be as Paul was. And I'll tell you something, again, having been at the State House, a lack of full-time legislators is, there's a lot of problems in the State House. The lack of full-time legislators is not among them. Average week, the legislature is in session one afternoon. Paul demonstrated, I think, and I think I'm a great beneficiary of how Paul did the job, because if there's one thing I'm not hearing when I go around knocking on doors and talking to people, I'm not hearing that Paul was not accessible, that Paul was not always where he was needed. Paul never missed a vote, and if Paul got a call, he returned it. And frankly, that's a commitment that I wouldn't be running for this office if I weren't willing to make that. I'm a very hard worker. And I know it would be very hard work. But frankly, I think that things that need to be done at the state level can be done by hard work, not by expenditure of time.
Kleinkopf cut me off here.
Could I answer the initial question?
That's all right. How do I know you're going to be nice to us in Hopkinton? How do I know that?
Right. One of the benefits also of the issues I'm running on, primarily, is that they're nonpartisan. They're also non-specific to the various towns in the district. I believe very strongly that the first and foremost challenge facing state government right now is getting its fiscal house in order. And until then, frankly, we had a big binge of, or a big avalanche of press releases at the end of this session saying, I brought this to my district and I brought that to my district. A lot of that was bonded money, meaning that it doesn't exist yet. A lot of that was in that $220 million on top of the $1 billion deficit, meaning it doesn't exist yet. And there's already talk at the State House about coming back in November to make spending cuts. Now, I guarantee you it won't be before the first Tuesday in November that they come back and make spending cuts, and that is arrogant and it is cynical. And we're dividing up pieces of pie that no longer exists. We're stabbing into the pie plate, and then everybody's congratulating themselves. I will work just as hard for Hopkinton and all the other towns as for Holliston.
Last question. Who's jumping? Michelle?
All right. Well, look for my list. Oh, where do you stand regarding the repeal of the state income tax?
You're up.
I'm up. This is a question that came up on Friday at our last forum. I think we've got some very real challenges at the state level. I think if this in fact passes, what will happen is the crisis associated with dealing with that will eclipse all other constructive efforts in the short time that will be needed to kind of figure out what to do there. I would sooner, I do not support that measure. I would sooner assure the public and take actions to assure the public that that type of extreme measure is not necessary, that we can have a plan to, as I said, control costs, to have focused efforts to generate new revenues, and to prioritize our resources such that that type of extreme measure is not necessary.
Dan?
You know, frankly, this notion that it would be a cataclysm, I think, rests on a faulty assumption. If passed as prologue, there's really no reason to assume that the legislature would allow that to actually be effectuated, even if it is passed. Last time the voters got fed up with how Beacon Hill spent their money and went to the ballot box and directed that the income tax be rolled back to 5%, the legislature simply passed a law saying that's no longer the law. And then they said, we'll take it back step by step. That's what we can afford to do, and we'll set benchmarks. And then when the economy met those benchmarks, they said, you know what, forget it, we're going to freeze it. We're not going to step it back to 5.0. So frankly, I am more interested in the fact that that is on the ballot, that people went out and collected those signatures. And why did they do that? Because people are fed up, because the state spent more money than ever before in the history of the Commonwealth last year. And if it passes and it becomes law, and I'm there in the legislature, I have the privilege to be there, I look forward to fighting hard to make sure that whatever system's put in its place isn't worse than what we've got right now. But frankly, I think it's an open question, even if it passes.